Today I'm sharing the final essential card layout deep dive. This one I called the strip layout, and it works really well when you want your background to be the star of the card. But like the other two essential layouts, there's lots of ways to customize it to keep it interesting. This week's color palette is Rainforest, Eucalyptus, and Dragonfruit with some black and white. I chose this one all by myself, no color cube assistance at all. I created a panel of each color and I cut strips from them. I referred to this essential layout as the strip layout, so I figured I would start literal. When I work with strips, I usually like to work with a backer panel made of printer paper. I put tape runner all over it because it's pretty forgiving at first, and it allows me to lift and replace the strips if I need to. It's best to get that first one down as straight as possible because it makes it easier later when trimming the panel down if everything's lined up nicely. I created a pattern with my colors, including some white strips, and I went just as far as I needed to get a square out of this one. Then, to use up all the strips instead of creating a whole bunch of leftovers, I started another panel with a different pattern of colors. I think it's really neat that you can get a different look just by changing the order you put them down. I filled this whole A2 panel, but you'll see in a bit that I ended up cutting this one down to a square as well. So obviously I have two strip layouts here, and the strips are built right in. So rather than adding a strip, I just put a black CZ Designs Congrats die cut on the left panel on one of the white stripes. For the second panel, I grabbed a Celebrate Sentiment stamp from Blot Shop, and I stamped it right onto my background. So a strip layout doesn't have to be an actual strip of cardstock added on top of a background. It can be built right in. I added a little solid black star stamp from Waffle Flower. To finish these, I trimmed down that first panel as I said, and the thing I like about this one is that it's symmetrical, with the colors building out from the white in the center. With the scraps of my ink panels, I used a couple of dots dies to create some little cardstock embellishments, and you'll see them on most of these cards. For my second panel, I backed the stripe panel onto a black panel that's centered on my white card base with a 1/4 inch of black showing on 3 sides. It's a little different than my usual square or circle in the center, and I think it's a fun change. My next background is a kind of a play on that craft that we used to do in kindergarten, where you lay down pieces of colorful tissue paper and have them overlap to give kind of a stained glass look. I used ink and I created my own little handmade temporary stencils with post-it notes. You just fold them in half and cut a rectangle. I'm using sticky notes that are sticky all over the back, and that just makes it easy to keep them in place when I'm blending my inks through. I started with my mini ink blending brushes, but I moved to the larger blending brushes, which lay down a smoother but lighter coat of ink over larger spaces. I just needed to be careful not to go over the edge of the sticky note as I built up the color to what I wanted. Once I had all the dragon fruit squares done, I cut another little stencil in a slightly different size. I think this one's a little more rectangular than square, and I blended the rainforest ink through. I think it's good to have a separate stencil for each color, at least for each color family. You could go lightest to darkest and keep using them if you wanted, as long as they're in that same color family. I moved it around the panel and tried to have some overlap with the pink and fill in the panel pretty evenly. But even at this point, I knew I wanted to leave some white space on this one, so I didn't worry about doing more than about 3 or 4 of each shape. For the eucalyptus, I cut a decidedly wonky rectangle. Not sure that was on purpose. And I blended that through in the largest white areas, turning it since this one really was more of a rectangle rather than a square, and it definitely has both vertical and horizontal positions. For all the colors, I also made sure I had some of the shapes going off the edges to give a continuous look. I felt like it needed something more, so I cut one final little rectangle and I went back to the dragon fruit and blended that around, overlapping with some of the other squares, even the pink. You can see how they layer up because they're translucent, and I kept going until I was happy with the balance and how much white space I had left. Now this time for my strip, I wanted to show that a strip can actually be a circle. Obviously, it's not a strip, but it's playing the part of helping my sentiment stand out from the background while leaving the background very visible. I used a Stampin' Up! Circle die with a decorative edge and a white waffle flower thank you die cut. For the next card, my background is once again going to be the star, and I created it by blending rainforest ink on a panel and then blending more rainforest ink through the Heartflake stencil from a Colorful Life Designs. This is kind of geometric as well as kind of whimsical in feeling. My strip and sentiment are going to be right on the card base, and the background panel is going to be over top, and short, kind of like this card I made in the original 3 Essential Layouts video. But the bottom edge doesn't have to be straight. It could be on an angle or like this time, a scallop. Here's a very old Pretty Pink Posh scallop die that cuts a scallop strip that has a stitching detail, but when you cut it, you also leave behind a scalloped edge on the panel. So I'm using the edge of the die, but I'm not actually using the die cut. I hope that's not confusing. Here's what I mean. I used this chunky thanks die cut from Averyell because that scallop panel is pretty dark and heavy, and I wanted it to match in weight as much as possible. And to add in the other colors, I glued on some Dragonfruit and Eucalyptus dots that I had cut to act as embellishments. I popped up the scallop panel and I glued the sentiment directly to the card to add some dimension and interest. It almost looks like an awning over a shop or something. Notice that I was careful about where I cut the scallop so that the pattern is pretty symmetrical on the panel, and that means those colored dots are also fairly symmetrical. Okay, for the next couple of cards, I made another one of those layered ink smoosh panels. I won't spend too much time on this because you can go back to the technique video and watch for all my tips. I recently got this triangle background die set from Concord and Ninth, and I'm excited to use it here to chop up the layered background and then piece it back together to kind of get a good mix of colors. There are 2 strip dies that cut the triangles and half triangles that you need to fill in a row, and then there's a background that pierces the shapes of the triangles so you can easily place them where they need to go. I sorted the triangles into pink, green, and mixed, where there's both pink and green visible on them, and then I added tape runner to the background and just tried to place the triangles down to get a good mix. Once I had the background all pieced together, I ran it through my die cutting machine just with plates to really put pressure on it and make sure everything was stuck down. And then I thought about how I was going to use it. With all the work I put into it, I thought a 2-for-1 design would be a good idea. So I trimmed the panel in half, but along one of the lines in the pattern to give me 2 angled panels. But then I thought of another idea. I trimmed along the next line in the pattern, and that will give me a strip and 2 angled panels. So I could get 3 cards if I wanted. But in the end, I decided to use the 2 angled panels together with an empty strip in between them for my Julie Hickey happy birthday sentiment. And that one line of triangles became my strip on my second card. I put it on a black background for some drama, and I embossed that with the Altenew Angled Mosaics embossing folder. It's not triangles, but it is geometric with angles, and it works well with the strip. The diagonal strip on this card is really a channel between the 2 background panels, and my sentiment is sitting in there, kind of recessed, for a different kind of dimension. And the black card has a ton of interest between the embossed background and the pops of color. And I finished both cards with more of those little dots. So even though I called it a strip layout, it can really be any shape over top of your background. And the background can be plain as plain or super detailed and colorful. As I said before, these 3 essential layouts are simply starting points, and you can make them into whatever you want. And that's the end of the series. Which layout's your favorite? Do you have any other layouts you consider to be essential? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.